You're listening to the MindPod Network. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by The Yoga of Strength, a new book written by Andrew Mark Rowe. And if you go to andrewmarkrowe.com, you can learn about this amazing new book, The Yoga of Strength. It's all happening. 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 It's all Hello, friends. Welcome to the podcast, episode 123 of the It's All Happening with Zach Leary podcast. That's me. I'm your host. So happy to be back with you. And in case you guys don't know, and think most of you do, but I am also hosting another podcast, which is the MAPS podcast, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And if you are interested in deep dives about very specific and kind of nuanced issues around scientific research into the ever-expanding world of psychedelics, check out the MAPS podcast. It's pretty cool what we're doing over there. So this week on the It's All Happening podcast, however, we have the founders of Pathway to Paris, Jesse Pear-Smith and Rebecca Foon. And Pathway to Paris, I keep doing that, is a partnership. It's this initiative, a really, really cool program, and they've partnered with United Nations Development Program and 350.org, aimed at bringing awareness to climate change with the assistance of musicians, artists, activists, climate change experts, and getting everyone to participate in a series of events and dialogues that help turn the Paris Agreement into reality. Yes, very, very cool stuff. Dissecting climate change and where it can go, how it can be curbed, how it cannot be curbed, the reality of it, and couching optimism and spirituality and politics and policy, and all of it together is a very complicated discussion, I found to have. But we are going to talk a little bit about that here for 1 second. So listen up.
We're at a remarkable moment in time. We face, over the next 2 decades, 2 fundamental transformations that will determine whether the next 100 years is the best of centuries or the worst of centuries. Let me illustrate with an example. I first visited Beijing 25 years ago to teach at the People's University of China. China was getting serious about market economics and about university education. So they decided to call in the foreign experts. Like most other people, I moved around Beijing by bicycle. Apart from dodging the occasional vehicle, it was a safe and easy way to get around. Cycling in Beijing now is a completely different prospect. The roads are jammed by cars and trucks. The air is dangerously polluted from the burning of coal and diesel. How did this come about? It came from the way in which Beijing has grown as a city. It's doubled over those 25 years, more than doubled, from 10 million to 20 million. It's become a sprawling urban area dependent on dirty fuel, dirty energy, particularly coal. China burns half the world's coal each year. And that's why it is a key reason why it is the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases. At the same time, we have to recognize that in that period, China has grown remarkably. It's become the world's second largest economy. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty. That's really important. But at the same time, the people of China are asking the question, what's the value of this growth if our cities are unlivable? They've analyzed, diagnosed that this is an unsustainable path of growth and development. China's planning to scale back coal. It's looking to build its cities in different ways. Over the next 2 decades, we'll see the demand for energy rise by 40%. And the growth in the economy and in the population is putting increasing pressure on our land, on our water, and on our forests. This is profound structural change. If we manage it in a negligent or a short-sighted way, we will create waste, pollution, congestion, destruction of land and forests. If we think of those 3 areas that I've illustrated with my numbers, cities, energy, land, if we manage all that badly, then the outlook for the lives and livelihoods of the people around the world would be poor and damaged. And more than that, the emissions of greenhouse gases would rise with immense risks to our climate. Concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are already higher than they've been for millions of years. If we go on increasing those concentrations, we risk temperatures over the next century or so that we have not seen on this planet for tens of millions of years. Are we going to look our grandchildren in the eye and tell them that we understood the issues, that we recognize the dangers and the opportunities, and still we fail to act? Surely not. Let's make the next 100 years the best of centuries.
That is a portion of a TED Talk that I go back to time and time again around the issue of climate change by economist Nicholas Stern, and it's called The State of the Climate and What We Might Do About It. And the reason I wanted to put a portion of that TED Talk into this podcast is because it does a fantastic job of illustrating the choice that most developing nations face. This choice that in fact is more of a problem when you look at it honestly and frankly. And that choice is the balance between economic prosperity and carbon emissions. The balance between growing your country and providing for all of your people and giving them jobs and a glimpse into that middle class reality that may temporarily solve some of your problems, and how that equation and everything that makes up that very nuanced, oblique way of looking at the world, how that translates into climate change and into accelerating negative effects of climate change on the world around us. And if you look at China, as Nicholas Stern did in his talk, which grew so fast at such a rapid pace, what took other countries 100 years to do, they did in 25. You can see the disaster that was created as a result. So this is important, not to dissect global economic policies and to look to federal governments and giant global initiatives as the solution here, which may or may not be a worthy thing to do. But if you look at your own personal economy, your own personal ecosystem that has to do with money and providing for yourself or your family and your loved ones versus convenience versus the carbon emissions that come as a result of that convenience, I know for certain that each one of us can make a change that can help offset carbon emissions. This is true, whether it's the car you buy, the food you buy, how much plastic you use, etc., etc., etc. Offsetting climate change and carbon emissions starts with us. It starts with our own personal economy that each one of us inhabit. And if we look to the man and to policy and politics, which sometimes is a decent thing to do, what if we look to them on this specific issue? Not much is going to happen. Change begins within. And now a word from our sponsor. In the ever-expanding universe of the world's philosophies, ideas, and traditions, one thing is for certain, and that is they too are subject to the laws of evolution, to the laws of change. Everything changes, mutates, and morphs into a new variation. Even age-old traditions that have stood the test of time adapt to the needs of the 21st century human experience. Included in this thinking is a spiritual practice or living science we call yoga. The brilliant Andrew Mark Rowe has created an offering that exemplifies some of the freshest thinking on the philosophies of yoga and weaved it into the narrative of his new book, The Yoga of Strength. The Yoga of Strength is the story of a coward who sheds his self-centeredness and fear to become a champion guided by his highest purpose. Weaving together motifs from mythology, high fantasy, visionary spiritual fiction, and lessons from the philosophy of yoga, really the philosophy of life. The book follows an initially unlikable noble-born squire named Andrew Cardiff on the eve of his induction into the Yellow Order. In the spirit of mutating ecosystems and traditions that are constantly evolving right before our very eyes is the world of media and publishing. Andrew is releasing the Yoga of Strength on a pre-order to publish basis. So if you go to andrewmarkrowe.com, and that's Mark Rowe, MarkRowe.com, andrewmarkrowe.com, you can get the book on a pre-order to publish basis. And if you do get it and rally around his amazing effort here, be sure to indicate if you want a digital copy or a physical one when you place the order. And he has a goal of getting 750 pre-orders in the queue to be considered by traditional publishers. So if the It's All Happening community can rally around Andrew here and show him love and support and get his book, just as he showed his love and support for the It's All Happening podcast. And you can go to his site and get a little taste of what the Yoga of Strength is all about and what Andrew is all about, and feel really good about helping Andrew and supporting independent media. The Yoga of Strength, pre-order to publish, andrewmarkrowe.com. All right, thank you to our sponsor. And yes, I know that intro was a little bit longer than usual. So now we're going to get right into the main attraction, Jesse Paris-Smith and Rebecca Foon, who are the founders of Pathway to Paris. And if you go to pathwaytoparis.com, you will learn about everything that they're doing and their very, very cool events that are coming up in September 16th at the Ace Hotel in Los Angeles. I mean, that's pretty cool. And that is going to have... who's it going to have? It's going to have Patti Smith, Karen O, Flea, Tony Hawk, Bill McKibben, Eric Burden. Oh my God. And then April 14th, Patti Smith and Bob Weir and Flea. Yes, you heard that right. So yes, Jesse Paris-Smith, the founder, one of the co-founders of Pathway to Paris, is Patti Smith's daughter. So if you hear her refer to her mother, that's who she's talking about. So these women are great. They are doing inspiring work in the world. Really get involved in what they're doing. Go to one of their shows and see how their energy and their passion is taking on this very, very difficult issue. All right, enjoy the show. All right. Welcome to the podcast, Jesse, Becky. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be with both of you. Very cool. So Pathways to Paris, for anybody listening, of course, if you go to URL and read about Pathways to Paris. But where I wanted to start off is, and it sparked some curiosity with me, and in that I understood like the connection to the Paris, to the agreement, that is now so infamous because of the current administration. So what I was curious about and where I kind of wanted to start is your connection specifically to the Paris Agreement and why that inspired you to take on climate change in that context. What is it about that was interesting to you?
Well, we started Pathway to Paris in 2014.
Yeah.
So we were in New York, and Becky plays cello, and I play piano, and we had known each other from years before through music, and we met, both playing the same concert, but we knew of one another as being, passionate about our planet and about climate change and doing different work in that area. And the People's Climate March happened in New York City in September 2014.
14, okay.
Yeah, and so, there were 400,000 people in New York, and it was the biggest climate march in history, and it was a really big deal and so incredible, but there was no cultural event planned around it or to celebrate it, or didn't seem to be a concert or anything tied to it.
Yeah.
So we felt that there was, kind of a need for that and a sort of a gap there. So we decided together that we just reached out to each other and said, let's put together a concert. So knowing that the COP21, the climate conference, was happening in Paris in 2015, we decided to name the event Pathway to Paris as a pathway to the Paris to the Paris talks,
okay,
to COP21. So it was to bring awareness. The name we chose was to bring awareness to the fact that the COP was happening.
That was going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
So we did that event. We didn't really know what we were going to do with it or where it was going to go, but there was so much passion and excitement with the performers and the speakers and the audience and people who are helping, and we decided to turn it into a year-long series leading up to COP21. Do you want to say more?
Yeah, and also we were really nervous about, because when you look at history and look at Kyoto and the talks that happened in Copenhagen, we were worried that the Paris talks would an agreement might not necessarily come to fruition. And so
from the first COP?
From COP21.
Oh, okay.
For the Paris Agreement, we were worried that the Paris Agreement wouldn't actually be as fully established or wouldn't come together. And so that was also part of our focus, was really trying to help encourage, because we planned it the very beginning of the talks. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when these talks happen, and and these great, or I shouldn't say these great, but these very iconic, leaders or very get together and talk. I mean, what's needed? I mean, policy change and policy shifts, I mean, they do need to manifest and result from these gatherings, right? I mean, getting together and just kind of talking about it and turning it into a political, photo op and kind of a round table, it's just not enough, right? I mean, you need to see policy, right? I mean, is that a core thing that you guys advocate for?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a tricky time right now because, well, I guess it's always tricky, but with science, there's so much science out there with where the state of the world and with the impacts of climate change, and no one really knows what's going to happen, but we have all this science of modeling where our current reality is and what it looks like if we maintain the GHG emissions that we're currently putting out there. And so in terms of policy, we really do believe that the Paris Agreement is a critical vehicle or tool, framework for the world. It's almost like a global collaboration of sorts, of almost like a global action plan to try and tackle this immense problem.
Very complicated.
But of course, it's one aspect, mm-hmm. and that's why we've also come up with some different ideas of solutions around how we can actually turn the Paris Agreement into reality, because it is so overwhelming and so daunting, and it's such a large, enormous issue, global issue that involves every single human being on planet Earth.
Yeah. Well, and what I like about what you guys are doing is, especially planning concerts and kind of, eventizing this, is that it's, these events that are supporting the dissemination of the idea, rather than you have these, what's a good example, like Hurricane Sandy or something.
Yeah.
That was a response to a disaster that already happened.
Right.
And then everybody shows up for those. I mean, Stones, U2, the biggest bands in the world show up and do those. But showing up for something that's let's hope there's not a disaster, right? And bringing awareness to this. Is it challenging?
Yeah, it is challenging for a lot of different reasons, because I think that, when we organize these events and these calls to actions and we put them out into the world, it's sometimes, it's easy to reach people who are already active around it, already doing things and already passionate about it and worried and wanting to do their best to help. And those are the people that, immediately show up and say, I'm here, yes, I want to perform, I want to speak, what can I do? But because like you said, it's not a tangible event right in your face, that, people don't always be like, well, that's, is that really happening? It's so far in the future. It's not really something in there, not in everyone's day-to-day thinking, which seems so wild. Some people say, oh, that, I'm not really passionate about that cause, or that's not something that's personal to me. And we are baffled by that. We say, isn't the destruction and end of the world everyone's problem? How is that? It's not a niche problem or a political thing. It's guys, come on.
It's crazy.
What's it going to take
to solve?
I mean, not to solve not to solve climate change, to get everybody to care.
Right. Well, I guess that's I don't know if either of us know the answer to that, but I think that what we're trying to do is at least fill a gap in terms of bringing together a diversity of people. So in terms of engaging the public at large. So and we feel that music is a really powerful mechanism to get people to care and tap into
maybe the most powerful
love.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, exactly. And so and we did feel that there was a disconnect in the world of music and art and vocalizing a real deep love for our planet and concern for our planet with regards to climate change and what's happening. And then also, and that's why we've also launched the 1,000 Cities Initiative, which is the idea that if 1,000 cities can meet the targets in the Paris Agreement and go beyond them, then that's a real way for us to help turn the Paris Agreement into action. And within that, we amplify that message in the concerts, and we have a campaign and different ways to engage people, but all within that lens of art and music and communication.
I mean, I learned everything in life almost through rock and roll. Almost.
Yeah, for sure.
And climate change aside, I'm completely frustrated by the lack of, cultural kind of unity around rock and roll and sort of the message and the passion behind what it used to mean.
Yeah.
And how it could mobilize.
You think about
everyone.
the 60s and the 70s
and even some kind of up until the 90s.
Right,
the last
for sure.
alternative rock movement was sort of a real powerful youth movement. And going to Lollapalooza in 1993, 92 was a powerful feeling that, oh my God, we could mobilize and do something here.
Yeah.
But I just don't feel that now.
Yeah.
And this is a great way to, I would think, to kind of also solve that problem as well.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
Yeah, so, specifically around climate change, though, and getting people to care, at this point, 10 years ago, maybe I felt a little bit different, but at this point, when you hear, especially in the Republican platform and the GOP, in California, the auto efficiency standards is a big thing here, and Trump trying to roll back the Obama era. So.
Right.
And, at this point, I don't even get it. I don't even get their side. Usually I'm a pretty objective thinker, and I could say, okay, well, they're trying to, spark business, spark the economy, keep things going. But at this point, it's just, I don't even understand it. Like, it just makes no sense whatsoever. Like, everything was in motion. Why disrupt this at all? So from a political standpoint here, what's the involvement like between what you guys are doing and politics? Or are you just trying to focus on the arts and not tackle the political problem?
Well, one thing is, like Becky was talking about, the 1,000 Cities initiative that we launched. We launched that shortly after the U.S. pulled out from the Paris Agreement, and everyone around us, was so scared and so frightened, because for a lot of people that was also kind of an awakening for them about climate change and about the future. And so we launched the 1,000 Cities initiative because we really feel like that cities have the potential to lead the way in this, and that it doesn't have to be the federal government, and that we don't have to rely on national government to lead the way, that cities and local communities can do that. And so many cities in America and around the world are doing that, and have not left the Paris Agreement, and they're still staying on board and on their goals and on their target, and they're great mayors, and that's really been really interesting for us, and talking with staffs of mayors in different cities, and just seeing what they're up to. It's really inspiring, and brings so much hope.
That's interesting. So go local.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So the 1,000 Cities initiative, it's if we can get 1,000 cities to go 100% renewable,
right,
like leave behind fossil fuels, that would be so great. And we love just imagining that, just like imagining what the cities can look like, and just, it's so exciting to imagine going into a new era of renewable energy.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's such a great thought. And 1,000 cities turns into 2,000.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Because it starts to become the norm.
It becomes the norm.
Yeah. And you want to be a leader as a best practice city. What city wouldn't, want to go down in history as being, we were the first one? Like how Ireland just became the first country to divest, from fossil fuels and different, these are really huge moments, and they'll go down in history. And so, mayors and cities who care and are passionate about it, they can really take the lead now.
They can, and that also gets into a sort of a technology discussion as well. Because I think when I observe the world and kind of witness people's ambivalence around climate change and around actual behavioral modifications, because it does require every one of us doing something different. I think a lot of it is, people are lazy, yes, but the technology options, like converting your house to solar, it's not that easy. Well, I shouldn't say it's not that easy. It's not that cheap. It's pretty expensive. For example.
And the price has gone down so much.
It has.
Yeah,
but I heard this story. I don't know if it's still true. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But a friend who I grew up with, their house in Benedict Canyon here in LA, city of Los Angeles, not Beverly Hills. What was required for them to convert to solar and work with the DWP about switching the meters? It was this 2-year-long bureaucracy.
Yeah, and they're carving out the way for everyone else.
Yeah. Wow. It was really just kind of almost eerie about how they weren't technically allowed to completely shut off the meter 100%, and you have to do it. It was
it's wild.
It's wild, isn't it?
And it's the sun.
It's the sun. It's the sun.
It's not like they're profiting or have some other thing. I don't know. It's the sun. It's wind. It's all stuff that everyone can use freely. You shouldn't have to jump through hoops, and it should just be free for everyone.
It should be free for everyone. So I'm big on sort of the technology, sort of the mutation of our condition into how we use the technology at hand. So I mean, I think part of this is kind of giving people solutions that, hey, look, this is really easy.
Right.
You can do it, right? So, I mean, getting those options out there and getting people to understand that, you know, this isn't, you know, it's not going to affect your life that much. Right?
Yeah, and that comes down to policy too, with incentives, because the technology is still so expensive, and so it's so important for government to subsidize until it becomes until it becomes more of a mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, that was like a big deal here with people buying Teslas. Was like the tax rebate was huge.
Yeah,
$6,000-7,000.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know it's kind of an amorphous, sort of vague, generalized question, but people's resistance here and really changing our lifestyle. Are we just lazy? Do we like convenience?
I think so. I think, you know, you think about like how in the scope of humanity, like we've only had these, you know, major conveniences and easy ways of doing things for such a short amount of time. Like we existed for so many, you know, decades and generations without all this stuff that makes everything so fast and easy and convenient. So we're 100% capable of getting back to that. I just think it's so, you know, that's really the trend, and that's the way we're going. It's like, how can I just like, you know, touch my eyeball and I'm sending a text message, or like just make things as fast and easy and like, you know, as possible. Like, you don't really need any of that. Like, we're all so addicted to our phones and checking it constantly and looking at our social media. And if you leave your phone at home, you have a little panic and you feel really strange and you don't know how to exist in the world. But if you just, after like an hour, you feel like, oh, I'm okay. I can do this. I don't really need it. And it seems it's the same with anything. So, but I think that we're so conditioned at this point. Even people who are, you know, really care about all these things and they can preach all this, that they're probably all practicing the same thing of what, you know, the conveniences. But
it's hard to break.
Yeah, but it would be nice to have a real movement of, maybe it'll come from like the really younger generation or a new generation who resist all this stuff and want to go back to a different time. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's really a phenomenon of the 20th century. You know, up until, you know, the real, you know, adoption of the industrial age, you know, to the late 19th century, you know, life was, unless you were insanely wealthy, life was kind of difficult. You know, I mean, even, you know, my dad would tell me stories. He was born in 1920. And when he was just a child, only child, 2 parents, Springfield, Massachusetts, they would bathe every 3rd day.
Wow.
You know, because they would heat the water just enough for one day, and one person would take a bath every 3rd day. You know, and it's not that long ago.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like these things, it's just amazing how quickly we can adapt or sort of unadapt, become oblivious to what it is we've created, which, I don't know, I kind of find it troubling, and I just look at my own behavior and I kind of find it.
Exactly.
Are you an optimist? Are you guys optimists?
Yeah, for sure.
You are?
Yeah, we are. I think we're both definitely optimists. I think I'm becoming more spiritual in these times with climate change, because we are so blatantly facing a potential extinction
or a disaster.
And so it does kind of put me into a whole other realm of contemplation about life. But I think with climate change, what we're trying to do is, because it's such a gigantic issue and there's so much fear around it, and I think even the way Trump is manifesting his whole time in government it's so fear-based, and it almost feels like strangely strategic in some weird way with what's happening with the state of the world. And so anyway, what we're trying to do is also just really inspire the public at large to to imagine exactly what Jesse was saying, like reimagine a world that's not this world, like a world that's completely transitioned off of fossil fuels. And it's really hard for us to imagine that because we don't know it. It's like it doesn't exist, and we're starting slowly to move into that transition. And the question is if we can do it fast enough. But it is a really exciting, creative conversation and awakening to imagine the creative city that is not dependent on fossil fuels.
But your optimism, and I'm somewhat of an optimist. I don't know if I'm contradicting myself here. I'm an optimist in the belief of human potential, of human imagination, and of reimagining everything. That we do have that innate ability.
Totally.
But I'm also I've spent a lot of time in India, and I love it, but I also feel like there are places I've been in India that I'm like, okay, this is gonna break. This is just gonna break.
Right.
Like, part of this is gonna go underwater. I mean, this also gets into I guess it's also climate change, but they're not gonna have enough food or water, and it's just gonna break. And I'm sort of like, well, shit, okay, half of India is gonna break, or New York's gonna go underwater.
Yeah.
Is that what it's gonna take?
Yeah,
it's a weird time right now.
I know.
I'm just saying, I think about that too, because in all of our communities, just this overwhelming feeling of sadness and grief and terror and darkness, and what that for so many people around us just hasn't really even left for a lot of people. Just it changed the lives of everyone around us, and some just feel incapacitated or just not knowing what to do. And so I just recognize right away, I could just fall into a dark disparaging place, or I can just say, no, it's over now. I'm gonna just deciding this is gonna end right now. I'm not gonna go. I'm just gonna dedicate myself to being hopeful and finding solutions, and just being really solution based in any kind of scary, dark time that happens. And just kind of decide, no, we're just going to focus on solutions. We're not even going to think about,
Cynicism doesn't do anyone.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. Yeah. It doesn't. I mean, I can be that way.
Yeah, we can all be that.
It doesn't do anybody any good.
And also, it's important to talk about the problems and to have discussions and conversations, but it shouldn't just be going around in circles talking about all the things that are wrong and all the things that are happening. You have to also say, okay, here's what's going on. What do we do about it? What are some ideas? What are some ambitious solutions?
That's really interesting, because I encounter, especially a lot of millennials, younger people, who don't want to make themselves aware of the possible, the disaster element of what could happen. And I've been accused of, well, God, man, that's so negative. Why even invite that consciousness into that? And I'm like, well, look, I'm not looking at it like that. I'm looking at it like, this is just reality. We have to face what's happening here. And whatever, New York going underwater, or all the coral reefs dying, whatever it is, which is starting to already happen. It's just happening, and owning up to the problem is how we...
Totally.
Yeah, and I see there's so much kind of denial, even amongst people who are on our team.
Exactly. And I guess that's the thing with optimism is you don't want to be optimistic and not awakened by what's happening.
It has to be a balance of everything.
There's a funny balance.
Yeah. Because... Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, no.
I think that there's also, I think especially in Western culture, there's this real attachment around this idea of positivity in a way that is not really helpful or healthy. Just I stay positive or to be up, and it's super oppressive to, people who are, to everyone who has bad times and dark days, and it's also not helpful in these kinds of conversations, because you can't just stay positive and optimistic and hopeful. You need all those things, but you also need to be realistic and to look at the facts and have the hard conversations. And so it has to be a real balance of everything.
There's a mixture there of it. Yeah. Well, look, there's a drone outside the window.
Oh my gosh, that's so scary.
Wow.
I think those are illegal in New York.
Hi, NSA. We just got interrupted by a Joan on the 5th floor of the Ace Hotel. Because here we are spreading propaganda.
I know.
Right?
They found us. They know we're being too. We're not being positive enough.
Back to the political thing for a second. I meant to ask this earlier, but the Trump administration leaving the Paris Accord. I mean, what are the implications of that on a global level?
Well, we recently, with science, I think there's a lot of it. There's maybe not a unanimous agreement of what's going to happen, but there's a lot of different views of like where it's going, and it's definitely challenging because like even some scientists feel that even with the current targets in the Paris Agreement, we're still looking at a 4, 5, 6 degree warming, like with countries meeting the targets, and that doesn't even include America. So it's tricky. Like there is debate right now about like what does the future actually look like, even with meeting the targets.
Right.
And the thing, like there's maps out there right now that show like a 4 degree warming. The only places on Earth where you can grow food are in Russia and Canada and a few other countries. So it's definitely like when you ask about optimism, I think it's also like when we look at climate change, mitigation and adaptation is really important. Like because a part of our world will definitely have to, because we're already living impacts of climate change, so we do have to adapt to the current realities of changes that are happening, and then try as hard as we can to try and shift our world at the same time as quickly as possible towards renewables and off of fossil fuels.
Yeah. But I don't know, I kind of felt like that move that Trump did with the Paris Accord, I don't know, I'm just sort of felt like, I mean, the signal that it sent to the rest of the world was the problem. I mean, the policy and stuff aside, I just feel like the signal that it's sent.
And also, we talk so much about how climate change is a global problem that requires like a massive collaboration of the entire world coming together. So it's almost like the Paris Agreement, even if the details of it might not be strong enough, it's also kind of like this call for a world peace. For us all, we have a huge problem, let's all come together.
And it unites us all.
Yeah, and maybe we need to work on the Paris Agreement. Maybe it's not good enough. Maybe we need to update it or keep talking about it. But it was a chance for the world to come together in this crisis, and for the United States to be the sole country that pulled away from that. It's just like he's going to go down in history. Like how I think about this all the time. Like how can you knowingly like wake up every day and say, I'm going to go down in history as a person who stopped like the world from coming together to try to work together. Like that's an inappropriate amount of power like for one person to have. It's just so disturbing.
It really is disturbing. And so, it is an inappropriate amount of power for anybody to have, but I think part of it was nobody would really think he would do that.
Because it's so outrageous.
It's so outrageous, right?
Yeah. It's funny, when I recently asked Pema Chodron what she thought about a question around optimism and climate change, and she said that what the world needs more than anything is cultivating boundless love and compassion for all, because we don't know what's going to happen, and I feel like that's so true, it just coming back to like Trump pulling out of the Paris Agreement. It's just what he's doing is the opposite of boundless love and compassion for all.
And I have a lot of spiritual leaders on this podcast, the Ram Dasses of the world, and that thought is a very universal.
Right.
It has to come down to just having loving awareness and loving compassion on a global level.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about the modern world is it's gotten so much smaller. The world is smaller now. You know, what used to be like in 1910, you know, what was happening in Iraq, if you sort of somehow got a newspaper, the International Tribune, that was like Mars.
Yeah.
You know, it took months to get there. Who knows? Iraq? I don't know. But now it's sort of like what's happening in India, and you know, them being one of the biggest, you know, problems here. It's like it affects us all, right? So, I mean, feeling like we're all in this together and having compassion for like everybody plays an equal role here, and what better, you know, opportunity for rock and roll to come in and, you know, kind of to the rescue here. And you know, we're seeing, you know, California right now, these car fires that are going on. And you know, I get listen to NPR a lot during the day, and the big NPR thread is this the new norm? Right, and that's I mean, that's the language they're using, and because they're really trying to drive it home. Is this the new norm? Is this the new norm?
Terrifying.
Whoa, that's heavy. Yeah. So how do we maintain our? I mean, talking to Pema Trojan, you saying you're becoming more spiritual through this. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, things hit me too as well, like when Stephen Hawking said that humanity has 100 years left right before he died. It's like, whew,
it just like comes and things like that haunt you throughout the day. They just come into your mind.
Do you find it hard? I mean, do you meditate?
Yeah.
Do you find it hard to stay in meditation through, since all of this stuff? I mean, you're in this much deeper than most people.
I mean, I learned about this all, you know, when I was a teenager, and the day that I learned about it was the day that I said, I'm not going to stop working on this for the rest of my life. I'm passionate about art and music, and I want to write, and I want to travel, and I, you know, there's so many other things that I wanted to dedicate my life to and explore, but it was like, well, I have to do this. So it's, I guess, just as I've grown up, you know, through adolescence and teen years and 20s, and it's been so woven into who I am. So it's kind of like you have like different parts of your life that are evolving at the same time. Like your spiritual life is evolving one time, but your you know, social awareness and your activism is evolving, and your music or musicians, your musicianship is evolving. It's like everything's kind of woven together and you know, working together as one. And so it's different things are hard. Sometimes it's hard to just, you know, play music because you're so upset about something, but sometimes music is the thing that heals you when you're feeling really dark, and it's like it all kind of like plays together. Maybe meditation is the thing that takes you away for a moment from all of the overwhelming things, but you know, I mean, I can't imagine, I'm 31, I can't imagine having just learned, if I just was who I am and then I had no idea about all this and all of a sudden it hit me. I don't know if I could handle it, but I feel like we've all grown up with it, and it's just been like...
So I mean, you grew up in, you know, a different environment than most, just, you know, growing up in the world of rock and roll. Do you think, I mean, did you grow up, were you encouraged to maintain activism, like some form, using art as a vehicle for activism? I mean, I feel like you might have.
I wouldn't say I was encouraged to, but I just seeing it around me in so many ways and just being around it, I just kind of felt like the natural thing that, of course, you do. When I was a teenager, my favorite music was 60s, 70s music. It's like all I listened to. So I would just go in my room and shut my door and listening to all these, you know, great protest songs. And I did my, you know, in my projects in school were always about protest music or different movements. And that's how I learned about climate change, was through a current events project at school. I did my project on global warming and came back to school and said, what are we doing? Why aren't we working on this? So I feel like going back to the topic of music, like all these, you know, singers who were with me, like feel like everybody has these stories, like the things you listen to as you get old. You're like, wow, like singing like Neil Young or whoever, just like singing about different moments in history and seeing how active they were through their mediums and their platforms, and just it felt like, well, yeah, we have to do this as a musician.
It's a responsibility.
Yeah, it's a responsibility, totally. And like you said, growing up, like seeing my mom on stage talk about all these things and using her experience of being with an audience and having platforms and always having a song on her albums about something.
I feel like she's been somewhat issue-based.
Yeah.
Throughout, more than most, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
And then my dad, same thing. Like they were, always, that was there wasn't just, rock and roll and songs. Like they were using that as a platform to get the young people to pay attention to what was going on. So, yeah, nobody ever said, like, you got to do this, it's important, but they were leading by example, and I feel like that's the best way to help people, too, and to get people to join on board. It's just leading by example and showing people, like how cities can, lead the way. They don't have to say, hey, you guys should be like us, just like they should just lead by example and be a best practice city, and then everyone else will see that's the norm, that's the responsibility.
That's the norm, right? That's the place that we want to try to get to, right?
Yeah.
Like these fires that are going on now, they're so powerful that they said it's created its own weather system.
Wow.
That's how hot it is. It's created its own weather system above it. Yeah, it's the first major brush fire to ever have done that.
Yeah. Wow.
Terrifying.
It's so, like, I went to this show last night at the Greek Theater, and I had never seen, they have the Smokey the Bear signs.
Yeah, sure.
And it said very high, and I had never seen that before, and I was in the car with my friend, I was just like, look at that! Like, that's so crazy, that's so scary, like, but is that the new norm now? Like every day is just very high probability of
during these hot
fires?
months, yeah.
Is that always like that here? Does it always say very high?
It doesn't always say very high.
But
it usually says, medium to high. That very high thing, it doesn't.
It's really scary.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's pretty gnarly. Yeah, and growing up in Los Angeles, the last decade. Seems like every year now, the fire situation. It's just, last year, I was living in Santa Monica, and what were they called? But by the Getty Center, those fires, there was ash on my doorstep in Santa Monica. But, again, it's so wild, but we get into this thing about, just adaptation and then sort of becoming oblivious, and then after 2 days you're like, oh, there's ash on my door, and you just go about your life, and so that's with this whole discussion, it really gets into the desire or the need for us to change as individuals. That's why I feel kind of inspired by this 1,000 cities thing, going local, because so often, the narrative in the media is federal government.
Right, definitely. And it's all negative and scary.
It's all negative and scary. Yeah, and it becomes very kind of high-level talking points, and right versus left, and it doesn't.
Yeah, it becomes so political so fast. Yeah.
And even like the Paris Accord, it's sort of like, I know it's important, it's great to have everyone getting together and talking, but I think it would be much more interesting is like the 1,000 mayors getting
so cool. Totally.
From around the world.
Like we were saying, even just in conversations with friends and family and whoever, after the U.S. pulled out of the agreement, just helping people be aware of what cities are doing, and just it really brings people a lot of hope and makes them want to be more active, because it gives them something to be optimistic about. And it was really cool how right after that happened, cities all over the country were being so vocal, and there was a whole new wave of
Are big cities too?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as a citizen, it's just so much easier to get involved when you're thinking about your own city and getting involved in public participation and designing the future of your city. Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know if I'm going to put you guys on the spot a little bit, but as responsible citizens, what is, if you could pick one thing that everybody could do to either bring awareness to this issue or to do their part in helping to curb this issue, what would it be?
I guess, the going to your mayor and organizing stuff around pushing for your city to become a best practice city and to go 100% renewable is, that seems like the best thing that people can, or one of the best things people can do is just, write letters and make phone calls and have events and have hearings and rallies and because I think that the local governments, they really need to hear from their citizens what they want, because if you get 1,000 letters to your mayor or whoever about one specific issue or something around this, then I think that's how real impact is made by making it known to your local government that this is what you want,
Yeah, do you want to share the Bill McKibben?
Oh, yeah. So Bill McKibben from 350, he's been with us since our first event, and he's such a great leader in the climate movement, and he wrote the first book on climate change, The End of Nature, and he's just so incredible. And he always speaks at our Pathway to Paris events, and at our last event in New York at Carnegie Hall, he decided that he wanted to have a live call to action, which was so cool because we have tangible actions and tools that people can use to take action after the events or leading up to it. But we decided to do this live action, so it was focused on divesting New York from fossil fuels. So during the concert, all the lights went on in Carnegie Hall, and everyone had a divestment pamphlet in their playbill and a piece of blank paper. So he led them and guided them through writing a letter to Comptroller Scott Stringer, encouraging him to divest the pension fund of New York from fossil fuels and reinvest in renewable energy. So it was so cool just being at Carnegie Hall, first of all, and just watching this strange moment of all these people writing letters. It was really so powerful.
Cool.
Hearing the paper ruffling and him just standing there waiting and
awesome.
telling them what to write. Yeah, so after the event, we collected all the letters and mailed them to Scott Stringer, and that was November 5th, 2017, and then January, I think it was January 6th, they announced that they're going to divest New York City, and they had been pushing for this, 350 and Bill McKibben for a few years, I'm not sure how many years, but of really working on making this happen, and so shortly after the Carnegie Hall event, there was a public hearing with Councilwoman Tish James, and so a bunch of us went, and people from all over the city were sharing their testimonials about why we should divest and what the money should be reinvested in, and it was so cool to see that right after we did the letters. And then in the first week of January, Becky and I went to the hearing, and Bill McKibben and Naomi Klein and Tish James and Scott Stringer and Mayor de Blasio all announced that New York City would divest from fossil fuels, and Comptroller Scott Stringer, he said, I got a lot of letters about this.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and Bill McKibben thanked us, and then...
That's so cool.
Yeah, and so it really, it was such a powerful moment, because it was when does he get, thousands of letters about one thing all of a sudden? When does that happen? And following the event, we all encouraged, through 350 and Pathway to Paris, and we all encouraged anyone who wasn't there, send letters, send emails, make phone calls, let's really make this a huge movement. And to see the impact of that, a real
It really makes a difference.
It makes a huge
difference, doesn't it? Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
That's so cool.
And at our events in California in September, we'll do something similar and choose a call to action and do the same thing at both events. So
using every event, like, gosh, if you could, I mean, one cool thing about like a rock and roll concert is sort of everybody's kind of held hostage from it. So you can kind of get them to do something.
And that's like, like our events, like there was like 3,000 people there, but think about what if it's like a stadium concert and someone has like, how many people are in a stadium concert?
Yeah, right. If so many.
If,
It's incredible.
A band is playing and they say, okay, everybody, take out your phones, go to this, we're going to sign this petition together right now, or like, let's send a letter to the mayor. Like, and
people would do it.
Yeah, and then he gets like 500,000 like letters, like in one day. Like, it takes like what, 2 minutes?
Takes 2 minutes,
do it?
right?
Yeah.
God, yeah, that is so cool. And I heard another somebody, I don't know who's doing it, but there was this kind of cool idea about this is just it's a little bit of a tangent, but tied into rock and roll, is that giant tours, not theater size but arena and bigger, they're incredibly ungreen. The touring itself with the trucks and and airplanes and flying everyone around, but that I forgot who it was, but they were trying to get Springsteen or U2 to sort of like offset it and find ways to go green.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. But that's, God, I never really, that's such a great tactic to do that, to get everybody,
it's
right?
so great. So ever since then, like I've been, trying to do like my friend Lucy Wainwright Roach was on a tour with the Indigo Girls, and they were in Detroit, and it was Earth Day, and I was going to go to the show that night, and my friends and I were like going around the city, like picking up trash all day and doing these Earth Day events, and then it was just like out with like picking up garbage at the riverfront, and I'm gonna go to the show, and she texted me and she's like, can you talk on stage tonight during the Indigo Girls set? And I was like, okay, but like we're picking up trash all day, it's crazy. But it was really cool that they wanted to do that, and they were like, it's Earth Day and we didn't have anything planned, and this is like just whatever you want to say. So it was cool, because stuff like that usually they put you at the beginning, and it's kind of the beginning of the night, and people aren't always paying attention, but they did it after the end of their set, in their encore, before their last encore song. So it was very end of the night, and everyone was all fired up. So I talked about Earth Day. It was really fun, and then I had everybody take their phones out and sign our 1,000 Cities petition. That when you sign it, it sends. It automatically sends a message to your local mayor and your local elected officials, urging them to transition your city off fossil fuels. So it's like, it only took a minute, and it was so good,
So let's talk about the events, San Francisco and LA. The dates are September
14th is at that's in San Francisco, because the Global Climate Action Summit is happening the 12th to 14th, and it'll be the last night of the summit. And it'll be my mom and Bob Weir and Flea, Eric Burden, Imani, she's a French pop soul singer. Tenzin Chogyal, he's a Tibetan singer. He lives in Australia. He's someone we collaborate with a lot. He's on the board of Pathway to Paris. And
I'm a huge Deadhead, so
great
with Bob Weir and my
we're
tentacles
so excited.
line up.
And Bill McKibben will be there, and Penny Opal Plant, she's going to speak, and we'll be there. And am I forgetting anyone?
Some special guests.
Special guests.
Okay.
Special guests.
And LA's on the 16th here at the Ace Theater.
16th.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that will also include Karen O and Tony Hawk.
Cool.
Which will be fun. Oh, and Olafur Eliasson will be in the 14th, and he'll do something really spectacular at that event.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, guys. If pathways-to-paris.com.
Pathway to Paris.
Pathway to Paris.
Just one. I mean, there's lots and lots of pathways, but our website is just one.
And I know this is, I don't know if you get this a lot, but Jesse Paris Smith and Pathway to Paris. There's like
I know.
my association there. I was like, wait, what's happening here?
Becca said it was a positive omen for the future that my parents named me Paris, and now here we are.
There you go. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode. Check back soon for another all-new episode of It's All Happening.